Got to do our part, and we got to know it's all him, but we got to do our part. And we got to know it's all him. And we got to do our part. And we got to know it's all him. All the horrible mistakes connected with Camp David. They didn't need anything. We didn't have to give them the land. We didn't have to give them the oil wells. We didn't have to spend $17 billion plus the $100 million on the oil wells that weren't ours to give away. All the security we lost, all the finances we lost. Why are we doing this? The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, as we are giving over a talk of the Rebbe, interspersed with commentary on how this is like completely relevant today. The Lubavitcher Rebbe says, why are we talking about this? Why are we focusing on the past? Why are we focusing on Camp David's mistakes? It's quite painful. Why are we focusing on mistakes we made, on bad that we did, and painful stuff? To not make the same mistakes, to listen to army, not politicians. So the Rebbe is saying this about 1982 in Lebanon. So the Rebbe said it very strongly. They didn't listen. Perhaps his words were for 2024. And Hamas and Gaza, and for us to absorb this message. The Rebbe said, looking at 1978 Camp David, comparing it to 1982 Lebanon, we've already made these same mistakes. Lebanon, we're not finishing off the job. The American president left on vacation, if you remember. The Israeli prime minister went to America, if you remember, and they still didn't finish off the job. And the politicians are still preventing the completing of the war, even though the army is warning them. This is the way to prevent casualties. More people are dying and more people are getting wounded, and the politicians are still politicians. They're not shifting. If you remember, we said that Golda Meir, who was the prime minister of Israel during the Yom Kippur War, she admitted her mistake publicly. Said it, she wrote it. She said, yes, we made a mistake. We were wrong. And hundreds of people died because we were wrong, because we were scared, because of political reasons. And that's why we didn't draft people, let alone make a preemptive strike. But here, that happened, the Yom Kippur War and those mistakes. Camp David and those mistakes. And now the politicians are not admitting, and they're continuing these same mistakes. And still, God, despite all these mistakes of the politicians, has compassion for us. He's still giving us the room to finish off the job, to minimize the casualties, if we would just listen to the army. And the Rebbe said we have to stop listening to people that are driven by fear. They're so scared. What will happen if we attack Beirut? And when you ask these people, how can you make the exact same mistake you made in the past? Like, you keep doing the same thing and it's not working. We tell these people, you saw, 1978 was 4 years before. The Yom Kippur War was not so many years before. Like, you saw. How could you make these same mistakes? You have nothing to say. It's very interesting giving this over, because I was literally just saying this to someone today about this idea of, like, you do something wrong and then you keep doing it. Like, you keep making the same mistake even though it doesn't work. And even though each year we see, or each time you see it doesn't work, but we still keep doing it. I literally today, and I was not thinking about this at all. I was thinking about something the person was telling me and something in my own life, and how, there's been a mistake I make for years and I keep making the same mistake and I still don't change. Anyone relate to that? Ideas of things that you keep doing, they don't work, and you keep doing them.
Yes, unfortunately. I have this problem.
So is there any happy ending? And then you realized, or no?
Not yet, but God willing. I'm still working on it.
Yes. Yeah. What I was saying today was how every year my taxes collide with my Passover, because tax date is April 15th. It's usually pretty close to Passover. And my daughter last year said to me something like, "Mom, when are you allowed to start doing taxes?" I'm like, I'd say February. So why do you always wait till the end? And I explained to her why, but, she sort of gave me a look like, I don't know, Ma, you keep doing it every year and it doesn't work. Why don't you do it differently? A lot of times we just get stuck in patterns and we know they don't work, but we don't think about change. So now that I'm saying this so publicly, I'm writing in my calendar this year to start doing my taxes in February. But when we're talking here, the Rebbe is actually focusing very specifically about people acting from fear. And because of fear, what they're doing isn't right, because it's fear driven. And if they realize this, if they overcame the fear, they would change their actions. Does that resonate for anyone? Can you think of something you've done that was fear-based and was a mistake, but because it was fear-based, that's why you did it? And then you realize that? That's good. I mean, if none of us have this fear that compels us to do things, then we're like, why in the world did I do that? Oh, because I was operating under fear. Well, that is what the Rebbe is saying is happening here. The Rebbe is saying the reason why these politicians are giving advice, not giving advice, are dictating terms that are wrong, that are hurting the people, that are causing casualties, is because they have fear. Now, what's their fear? Fear of what the world's going to say, fear of what America's going to say, fear of their reputation, fear of their getting or not getting reelected. Whatever their fears are, they probably aren't existential fears per se. Whatever their fears are, they're driving them to do the wrong thing, to pacify those fears.
You asked that question. I couldn't get to the computer, but I get driven by fear a lot, because a lot of times you think, well, if I don't do this, this is going to fail. And I don't sit back and think, well, if I do this, it's wrong. And so the fear drives me to do something dangerous, around animals is what I'm talking about. So yes, fear can drive us to do things that we normally wouldn't do.
So you're saying with all your experience, you have fear around animals?
Well, you can. I mean, even more experience will make you have more fear because you know the dangers of the animals.
Uh-huh.
I mean, if you have this 100,000-pound horse running at you, you're going to have fear. There's no way you're not.
And do you see that when you're under fear, you make mistakes? And if you weren't feeling the fear, you would choose a different road that's probably better?
Definitely. Because if you've got like an instance, like I said, of an animal attacking, your fear can freeze you and you won't move. It's like, oh my gosh. And you get hit because the fear freezes your responses.
That's so interesting. I'm wondering, going back to the politicians, are they operating from this frozen state because they have so much fear? Again, a different type of fear of losing their position, fear of losing their power, fear of losing their prestige. But
you nailed it. They have the fear of losing their power. If they don't do what the others are requesting, they are in fear of losing their power.
But I think it's interesting what you said, Dixie, that when you're fearful, you're frozen, and therefore you can't do what's right because you're frozen. And if you weren't fearful, you would do the right thing, which in your case would be to get out of the way. That's interesting. So I see, Natalie, you wrote about eating too many M&Ms that you buy to make cookies, but you really end up eating them. So that's not a fear-based thing. You were going back to my previous comment, which was the idea of we keep making the same mistakes, and then we keep making the same mistakes. And you know the same thing by procrastinating. Like, it doesn't work, and you keep doing it. And it doesn't work, and you keep doing it.
Yes, my husband keeps buying Costco-sized things of M&Ms, and I make them for my customers at work. But when I'm not making them for customers at work, I tend to eat them a lot, which is not particularly helpful for weight loss.
Yes. I think I have that with chocolate chips. So yes, I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, I totally understand.
But they're really helpful. My customers do love the cookies. So
Right. So it's good to buy something that the customers love, but you have no interest in. So you can think of a different way. Sometimes, again, we make the mistakes and we don't even realize it's a mistake because we just keep doing it. So it doesn't exactly work, but we keep doing it because like your customers need the cookies. Like, I need to get my taxes done, and due date every year is April 15th. And so we have to sort of like step out of the box to say, wait, this isn't working. Is there a way to do it better? Is there a way to do it that it works? Now, going back to Dixie's example, I don't really know of a way. Of course, I know nothing about handling animals, and I'm sure Dixie's a pro, so probably there isn't a better way than how she's doing it. But she's just saying the fear factor kicks in.
Exactly. You can have fear. You know you need to get out of the way, but for some reason you just can't get out of the way. And I don't understand it. I don't know why, but I don't know. I can't explain it. And thank God it doesn't happen very often. But then there's got the other side that you're not fearful of an animal attacking you, which my husband wasn't fearful of anything. And I couldn't believe it. We had a stallion attack him. He was working him in the round pen, and he came at him with his mouth wide open. And I was like, oh my God, he's going to kill you. I was watching, and Jack never moved. He wasn't fearful of the stallion, and that horse backed off.
Oh, wow. So because he wasn't fearful, the horse didn't do anything.
No, he didn't attack him. And I mean, yeah, it scary. But
Well, I think
but
that's a
then
very
another
strong point you're saying, because the animal actually makes perfect sense to me. The animal senses your fear.
uh-huh.
And if the animal senses your fear, that's its green light to attack. Like the fact that you're fearful in of itself makes him attack. And if Jack wasn't fearful at all, then it's like there's no opening. Jack's a man, he's an animal, and he backs off. So that's actually really true. And I think what Dixie is opening it up really relates to this whole point that the Rebbe was saying. If you remember, the Rebbe was bringing this out previously about how to best handle the terrorists. The Rebbe was saying that we have to be strong, because when they sense our fear, when they sense our weakness, then they push more and more and more. And if they know we are strong, then they are fearful and they don't do anything. Remember, I was giving examples from since October 7th, how various groups of Arabs that were constantly terrorizing the Jewish population didn't. They stopped because they see the response that's now happening, and then they're scared, so they're not going to do it. So I think what you're saying about Jack is so true. And obviously it works with a man and an animal, because the animal senses that. And it also works with men and men. And it also, I'm sure, works with other people in other areas. Have other people seen this? When they are not fearful, the situation changes because they're not falling prey to fear. I mean, Dixie gave us like a great, great example, which is, of course, very, limited in its scope of who has a relevancy to it, but it's a perfect example. Anyone has seen this in their life, in other areas?
Yes, definitely.
You've seen that when you are not fearful, that thing which you are fearing stops.
Yes, and actually not only stops, but is the exact opposite. Becomes good.
Wow.
Well, I think it's the same technique, the technique of the bullies, no? The experts claim that you must don't be afraid, because then the bully will never stop. And once you confront them, and then that stops, because you not afraid of them anymore.
Exactly, Ruthie. That's what there's a whole approach now in education, in people that deal with situations with bullying, which of course is rampant throughout the whole school system, all over the world. And this new approach is, we can't try to work with a bully. Like, it's hard to change a bully. We have to work with the victims to make them non-victims. And how do you make someone a non-victim? By exactly like what you're saying, by getting them out of this victimhood, out of this victim mentality, out of this fear-based perspective. And when they no longer are in that space, the bully doesn't attack them. There's nobody to attack if nobody is fearful of them. 100%. I think what Danielle is saying is amazing, because she says it actually becomes something positive. And she's saying she sees this in her life. And it's very true. And again, going back to what Dixie was saying, that's man-animal. But just as it plays out with man-animal, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe says, it plays out with the terrorists in Israel. And like Ruthie's saying, it plays out with the bully and the victim. And Danielle's saying it plays out in her life as well. So this is, we all have to understand this, because it's on every level. Our fear engenders the harm. And when we're not fearful, there's no space to be attacked. So, but this, unfortunately, what the Rebbe is saying is these political leaders in Israel are fearful of losing what they have, what they value. And because of that, they're making catastrophic mistakes, cause a lot of loss of life and danger to the people of Israel. I saw today a little clip. A man was saying how he went to the South to watch it. He said to see it with his own eyes, not to see it on a screen. He said, just like, of course, there's a concept, I don't know if you've heard of it, called March of the Living, where people go to Auschwitz and the other concentration camps to really, really, really get the message. He said everyone in Israel should go down, see these communities, to really, really, really get this message, to really understand, and to really understand that we need a real solution. We need a God-based solution, because otherwise it's just going to happen again. And definitely fear is what feeds it. Fear engenders the attack. Fear is what pulls them to harm us, because they sense it and they know the opening. Just like Ruthie said about the bully. Exactly the same thing. But these politicians, the Rebbe said, when you speak to them and you ask them and you question them and you say, what's going on? You saw what happened. You saw what happened by Camp David. You saw what happened by the Yom Kippur War. You saw what happened by the Six-Day War. You saw what happened by Sinai. You saw. What are you doing? They have no answer. There is no answer. Because it's a fear-based response. Like Dixie said, she's fearful and she's doing the wrong thing, but she's fearful, so she's frozen. The Rebbe says that God should bring them to repent. Because when they're serving God, they're going to follow the army, not politics, and they'll finish the job. Meaning, again, when you get ego out of the way, when you get pride out of the way, when you get your position out of the way, when you're thinking of God, you're thinking of what's good for the people. What would God want? God would want the people protected. And then everything else falls away and you just do what you can to ensure security. And that's the situation they have to be in. And the army merited that they're protecting the Jewish people with self-sacrifice, with unfortunately real self-sacrifice. There's like 3,000 wounded and about 200 that died now in Gaza. And the Rebbe said they should continue to guarantee the safety of the people and finish the job. So this is a theme that the Rebbe is saying throughout this entire talk. And we keep saying this phrase, to finish the job. How does this apply to us? Have you been in a situation where you started something good, but didn't finish it, and then it didn't accomplish? Like, even though you started it, but since you didn't finish it, in the end, it didn't help at all because it was unfinished. Or maybe conversely, that you pushed and finished, like a happy ending to the story. You pushed and you finished, and then it worked. Anyone been in that situation? Because we keep repeating this theme, finish the job. Have you seen in your own life what happens when you don't finish the job, and conversely, what happens when you do finish the job?
I actually had one on what you were saying a minute ago about fear. So in pilot training, there's a lot of skills that you need to have just to function. And there's a lot of skills you have to practice if the airplane ever gets out of your control. And they're all very scary. There's lots of situations where the airplane can get haywire, and you have to practice them during training, and you have to practice them after you're done with training, so that when, God forbid, they actually happen in air and the airplane is actually out of your control, you don't have to think about what to do. You've practiced it enough, you've faced the fear enough that you just do what you need to do without thinking. It needs to be muscle memory. I'm almost thinking this can in some ways apply to some of the ritualistic aspect of Judaism. If you're doing what God wants most of the day, I mean, I'd say none of us are perfect about doing it all the time, but let's say you are perfect about doing it all the time. And then when you're in these complicated, nuanced, difficult situations, you already know what to do.
So you're saying that's how you would overcome the fear? You're going back to what Dixie said about being frozen?
Right, exactly. Because in pilot training, you can't freeze, you'll crash. But you've practiced facing these situations where the airplane is out of your control, the engine quits, you stall it there, it's in a turn, it's in a spin, there's something goes wrong while you're landing, something goes wrong when you're taking off. Like you practice so many of these difficult situations so that when they happen, because you don't have time to think about it, you don't have time to freeze.
So you're saying something very interesting. So you're saying all of the commandments we do are so ingrained in us that even when we're in a fearful situation, we can naturally keep doing them and naturally keep serving God because, like you said, muscle memory, it's ingrained in us like the pilot. Though I'm sure, going back to Dixie, she must have certain basic safety procedures that are ingrained in her also, but I guess the fear overwhelms them, maybe because it doesn't happen so often. But that's very, very interesting, bringing that analogy from the pilot and connecting it to serving God and all the commandments. And definitely the sages speak about this idea of what we call, say, muscle memory. Like the sages say, you should be so used to giving charity that when you see a poor person, your hand automatically stretches out. Or when you hear the words of prayer, that when we're in prayer, we bow. If you hear those words, your body should automatically bow, which means, yes, it is so, so ingrained in us. It's just a part of us, no matter what's going on. And you're right, no matter what's going on. And that is, of course, how Judaism has survived, that no matter what's going on, we keep doing it. We just keep doing it, and it continues. No matter what the situation is, it continues. I think that is very relevant. Going back to what I was saying, just because I think that I think here the Rebbe is keeps saying this theme about finishing the job. Says anyone has something in their life where they saw that they started something good, but didn't finish it, and it wasn't useful at all because they didn't finish it, or something that they did finish and then it was useful, but until it was finished, it wasn't useful. Because that's the point the Rebbe is saying here, that it, like, again, going back to Lebanon, if you conquer all the way to Beirut, but then let the PLO and the other terrorists go off to Tunisia, and then you leave Lebanon, well, you didn't finish the job. So what did we accomplish? Accomplished a lot of dead soldiers, a lot of wounded soldiers, and the terrorists continue. And now we have 120,000 Hezbollah that are far larger than the PLO was in Lebanon in 1982. And God forbid putting it now into what's going on in Gaza. I know there's so many pressures on Israel now. If they, God forbid, do not finish the job, what does that mean? All the wounded, all the dead, and they'll rebuild the town halls that got destroyed. They'll just keep, I mean, God forbid, I don't want to say such words, but what would happen if they don't finish the job, which is a
So I have
long
one that
job.
comes to mind right away. So at my parents' house, they live in Washington. I don't know if you all have ever dealt with blackberry brambles, but there is a huge hill where my parents put a ton of rhododendron bushes, but it was originally a huge hill of blackberry brambles. And so from the time I was little, like 7 or 8 years old, every summer, every winter, you're fighting the blackberry brambles, because those suckers can grow like 6 to 12 inches underground a day. And so they'll pop up all over the place. And like last year, my mom got really busy taking care of my grandpa before he died. So a lot of years wasn't able to take care of him. So anyways, so one time we were out there for several weeks. So we were working on him out there with her. And it's like one of the roots that we were getting to was so big that my dad had to come out and hack it off with an axe. It was like 6 or 7 inches in diameter. It was so big. So I know exactly what you mean about if you don't get it all the way, it's going to come back bigger and bigger
again,
and
if
bigger.
you go
There's
back
been
and you
30
think,
years.
right, and if you go back and think, well, if when they first were doing it, they had done it right.
Or even the neighbors, that's the problem, is like when we dug out that hill, we got them all, but they're coming in from the neighbors.
I have the same situation with local weed. When we moved out here, we had 1,600 and some acres. Local weed killed, I think it was, how many of our horses died from it? I forgot. I think it was like 8. We lost $100,000 worth of horses because they ate the local weed. And it was devastating. I mean, just devastating.
That's horrible.
And so we hired a company to spray it. And the neighbors complained to the point where the company that was spraying would not finish the spraying of the job of the local weed. We had first tried, we got a sprayer and everything, and Jack was spraying pastures from sun up to sundown, and was just too much land. And so we hired this company. The neighbors complained because they were flying too low over their buffalo. So they ended up wouldn't spray anymore. So Jack and I and some friends off and on, we started digging local weed. Local weed, as your cranberries, can have roots 4 feet down. And they told us we would not get rid of the local weed by digging them. That was impossible. But they were wrong, and God was right. We ended up, that's how I lost one of my best dogs too, but that's another story. We ended up digging for, I don't know how many it took us, how long, but Jack and I and our friends, off and on, one day we dug 1,100 local weed. Another day we dug 1,400, and so on for weeks. And we finally cleared these pastures of local weed. And the pasture though that we didn't get cleared, the local weed has come back in a little bit. But the pastures that we got all the local weeds, just like if they don't get rid of Hamas and Gaza's, it will come back. But the pastures that we dug the local weed on and got all of them, Baruch Hashem, they are still to this day, 5-6 years later, local weed free. So you've got the same thing with Gaza. You've got to finish the job. If Israel does not finish the job, it will come back, just like you said.
Wow, that's such a perfect example, because it looked impossible. Everyone told you it would be impossible. It took enormous effort, enormous physical effort, days and days and days and days, you and Jack and your friends. And it's like, why are we doing this impossible thing? Because we have to, because otherwise our horses are going to die. And they are dying, and they did die. So we got to do it. And you just pushed, and you did it, 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 even though it seemed impossible, even though how could you get rid of it? And you did it with God's help. You did it. And you're right. It's a perfect metaphor for exactly what the Rebbe was saying about it in 1982 and exactly what's happening now. It is a huge job. And every time I get a message, they found another tunnel. They found another tunnel. They found another tunnel. Hamas poured, no exaggeration, millions of dollars that they had, because the world was pouring aid for the poor Gazan refugees. And all
Most of it
that
comes
aid
from
money
us.
for the poor Gazan refugees went into these tunnels. They found receipts. Israel found receipts in the Hamas records of literally millions of dollars in cement, in the steel structuring. You know, it's not like a little, it's like real deal stuff going on here. Millions of dollars of construction work. So they find another one. They find another one. They find another one. And you're like, how in the world are they going to find them all? How in the world could anyone find them all? Well, as Dixie's saying, there's the hand of God part of it. You trust God, and you have to go with the trust of God, and you have to keep doing it and 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 doing it. That's
No
it.
matter what
You
anybody
don't
says.
have another option. You don't have another option.
No matter what anybody says, you go ahead. Whether they say you can't do it, it doesn't matter. If God's put it on your heart to do it, it will work.
Right. And that's what the Israeli government has to be strong. And that's why we're learning this, to give the Israeli government the spiritual strength, because we all know the pressures they're under, to say, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. This is our survival. We can't have another October 7th. Honestly, it doesn't matter. The Rebbe said that when you go with God's strength, like Dixie was saying, when you go with God's strength, and when you do what he says, when you listen with him, the more we bring God in, the more it works. The more in general, our life works. The more we bring God in, the more our life works. And when we don't bring God in, it just doesn't work as well. And I hope you all have seen this, that the more we bring God in, the more it works. There says here, what I mean by bringing God in includes, it's not exclusive to, but it includes that you can't give away land, even if it's not innately Israeli land, right? They're over here talking about the land of Lebanon. It's not Israeli land. It doesn't have the holiness of Israel. It's not Israel. But if you conquered it, don't give it up, because you need that for military security. And if we can bring God in, it works. It works. With the army has to go in the path of God, not in a matter of like, oh, we're so great, we're the IDF, we're the greatest army in the world. No, we have to go with the sense of God's empowering us. God's power flows through us. This is all from God's energy. But at the same time, even though it's all from God's energy, God wants us to use our physical arms, our physical intelligence, our physical weaponry. We need to use nature, but not believe in nature, which is very subtle, which is a hard thing to balance, and we all have to balance it, and we all struggle with balancing it. But when we follow God's road, God helps. And God could help to such a degree, and will help to such a degree, that we don't even need to fight. Just going out in all our weaponry and armor will scare them. And they'll just crumble, because, like happened, of course, very, very dramatically in the 6-Day War, because God's giving them a fear of us. God's giving them a fear because we're connected to him. We need to do, and we need to know it's all from God. That's a very hard balancing act. And some of us fall on either side of that fence, meaning some of us fall into like, all right, it's all from God, so I don't have to do that much. And God wants us to do. And some of us fall more commonly to fall into, I have to do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this, and I have to do this. So yeah, peripherally, God's taking care, but I'm making sure he's not going to mess up, I'm really very focused, taking care of it for both of us. So how do you balance that? How do you balance, like here the Rebbe is saying to the Israeli army, now that we got past the idea, we're saying, Israeli politicians, repent, turn to God. And then for sure, you're going to do what God wants, which is protect the Jewish people, protect the security of the land and the people. So now we're down to our army, and the demand from our army is be an excellent army and know it's all from God. Work really hard, strategically, physically, do everything you can, and know it's all. How do you balance that in your life? How do you see that balancing act between working and knowing it's all God?
Well, in my life, quite frankly, in the physical shape I'm in now, when I can get work done, it is all from God. Today, I literally cleaned five horses' pens or stalls and runs. And most days I could never do that. But I don't know, everything was just it was cold, and I love cleaning, and the people weren't able to be here to clean that early. And I just got started, and it was totally Hashem, because I did get all of them done before they got back. And actually, to be able to dump the cart was such a blessing, because you have to push it up a little hill. And I kept saying, just one step at a time, easy, just take it. And I did. I got it dumped twice. The third time I didn't have the energy to jump it. But it's all from God. Everything we do every day of our lives is from God. And if he gives us the ability to do it that day, Baruch Hashem, do it.
Wow. Beautiful. Anyone else? How they handle that balance?
I remind myself of the phrase that actually I learned from you, Cyril, which is do your part, God will take care of it, but you have to do your part. We could talk about that quite a bit. I know you have, but I remind myself of that quite a bit, and it helps. I feel like it really helps center me and have me focus on the fact that everything is Hashem and he will take care of everything, but I still need to do my part.
Absolutely. Anyone else? How you balance that? Because we all, like Danielle said, we've definitely discussed this because we all deal with this. Here we're talking about the Israeli army, but it's each one of us in our own personal life, the same, like Danielle said, got to do our part, and we got to know it's all him, but we got to do our part, and we got to know it's all him, and we got to do our part, and we got to know it's all him. Something else the Rebbe just said here that I thought was also something very powerful and practical, that the Rebbe is saying, the more you bring God in, the more it works, which was exactly, as I'm saying, that little video clip that I saw earlier today, where the speaker was just saying, that's why, like, how in the world did October 7th happen? Because they didn't bring God. But have you seen this in your life? That as you bring God in, things that could go so wrong somehow go right, or things that don't usually work, do work, or just see success and know it's so smooth because God's making it smooth, because you're bringing him in. Have you seen that the more you bring God in, the more things work?
Absolutely.
Every day. If I don't
I've definitely seen the reverse.
Prayers. Oh, yeah.
So Danielle and Dixie are yes, and Natalia, well, you see the other end, which is another form of yes. And I think both are true, because if we're like, oops, that did not
doubt
work.
about it. No doubt about it.
No doubt
When I start following the Jewish community, that's, as Danielle said, that's what I learned. That I have to do my part, and he will take care of the rest. And just trust and wait. We can't be impatient. We can't be requested. No, it has to be under his will, and we must trust that he has everything under control. Whatever it happens is his will, and is the best for us.
Absolutely. I see this so much in my own life.
And in
I
the
agree
case
with
of
that.
Israel has the right to secure their borders if the neighbors are not friendly, but then they have to take care of it. I mean, we have issues, but not as bad as Israel, of course, with organized crime in Mexico, and that's because the government haven't taken care of them. They just push them away, and then they come back anytime they want later on. So it's a non-ending thing if you don't finish the job.
Right. Right. That's a perfect example of not finishing the job, and therefore it's not ending. But as Ruthie is saying, and Danielle and Dixie and Natalie, I guess it's just universal. I see this so much in my life. You bring in God and then things work. And it's not always so like sometimes like you push yourself and you do more for God. And then like something totally unrelated works. And then you have to connect the dots and say, yeah, I really pushed. And I wasn't, when I was pushing, thinking about that thing. It was not on my mind at all. Totally not related to that issue. But it was so obvious that it was like, whoa, hand to God, how that worked, how that happened. And I definitely see this all the time, again and again and again and again and again and again. We bring in God, we bring in God, we bring in God, we bring God to our life. And then the details of our life work. And even though those details might not have anything to do with how we're bringing in God, it's my life. God's in my life and his energy is shining in my life. And then my life works. And like Natalie is saying, and the opposite is true as well. But here now, for the whole country of Israel, for that whole state, it's like our belief, our commitment, our bringing God in with our psalms, with our charity, with our Torah study. That's, God has to accept that. That has to be good enough. That has to be bringing God in, because not fair. We can't have more innocent people suffer. And we just have to it just has to be good enough. God just has to see and accept our commitment, our conviction, our completing the jobs, our not giving into fear, our belief and strength. Finish the job. We're empowering you with our trust. We're empowering you with our faith. That has to be good enough, and God has to come through. So we should see it. Thank you so much for joining, and we should have a really wonderful week where we see all these things we're talking about. We see in actuality. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank
Can I
you.
say one more thing?
Mm-hmm.
We went to the Kabod for New Moon.
Mm-hmm.
And, the speaker was wonderful, but the most touching, holy thing that happened that night was the Charles, he's a Cohen in the church, and he got up. The rabbi called him up and he read the names of all the captives still, of all who were killed. And it was just unbelievable. Hundreds of names he read off. And it was the most beautiful, beautiful thing that happened that night in their memory.
Wow. I'll put on the group. It's probably in Hebrew. Yeah. It moved me very much. It was a Hebrew song. It's not going to work. I think everything, I'm trying to think, was it English or Hebrew, the subtitles? I'm assuming it was Hebrew, but it was Hebrew song with the people singing it were people who lost parents, siblings, people that lost people in the war, in these terror attacks.
Yeah.
I'm going to check it and see if it's in English, because if it's not going to really work. But if it is, it was so moving.
Well, it'd be wonderful to hear it in Hebrew.
Okay.
It would be absolutely wonderful. I love to listen to Hebrew, even if I don't understand all of it. I pick up a few words.
Okay, well, if you don't understand, all the children you see singing and all the families you see, they're all people that lost family in the terror attacks.
Wow.
That was the point.
Wow.
Okay.
Yes,
I'll post it right now.
Please.
Okay. We should have a wonderful week and see a lot of God's hand, God's loving, compassionate hand.